Welcome to today's deep dive. Today, we are going to be tackling the complex world of international tariffs.
Those taxes countries put on imports.
Yeah, exactly. You've probably heard of them, but do you really understand how they work?
Well, that's what we are here to figure out.
Exactly. We're going to use a real-world example, a trade scuffle between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico.
To unpack what these things actually do and what kind of ripple effects they can have.
Exactly. So our sources for this deep dive are a series of articles and analysis from Sky News.
They do a good job of covering the breaking news, but also offering expert commentary.
Right, so it's a good mix of like what happened and what does it all mean.
Exactly.
Awesome. Okay, so let's set the scene. Sky News reported that former President Trump decided to impose tariffs on goods coming from Canada and Mexico.
Right.
Can you give us a little more context on tariffs before we get into the specifics of this case? What are they and why do countries use them?
Well, a tariff is basically a tax on imported goods, a way for a country to try and control the flow of goods across its borders. Sometimes it's about protecting their own industries from foreign competition.
Like a shield for domestic businesses.
Exactly. Other times it's a bargaining chip in international negotiations, a way to exert pressure and try and get other countries to play ball.
So in this case, was Trump using tariffs more to protect American businesses, or was it more of a power play?
It seems like it was a bit of both.
Hmm.
This wasn't happening in a vacuum.
Right.
There's a long history of trade tensions between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Think back to NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement.
Hmm.
It was supposed to make trade easier between these three countries, but it also sparked concerns about job losses and unfair competition.
Especially in the U.S.
Exactly. These tariffs that Trump imposed were in some ways a continuation of those underlying anxieties and frustrations.
So it's not just about economics. There's a lot of political baggage involved, too.
Absolutely.
And I'm guessing Canada and Mexico weren't just going to take this lying down?
Of course not. Sky News highlighted how both countries retaliated, imposing their own tariffs on a range of U.S. products.
Really?
They wanted to show that they wouldn't be bullied and were prepared to fight back.
Wow. So
So-
it's a classic example of how trade disputes can quickly escalate into this tit-for-tat battle.
Exactly.
It sounds like things were getting pretty heated. Did this eventually devolve into a full-on trade war, or did cooler heads prevail?
Well, things did get pretty tense, and the whole situation had the potential to really spiral out of control.
Oh, I bet.
Sky News reported that there was even a phone call between former President Trump and Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau to try and hash things out.
Oh, wow. A presidential phone call. That sounds intense.
It was. They definitely made their positions clear. The interesting thing is, according to Sky News, the tariffs were actually paused for 30 days following that conversation.
Interesting. So not a complete resolution, more like a temporary ceasefire?
Exactly.
What was the significance of that pause? Did it achieve anything?
It was definitely significant. Pausing the tariffs provided some breathing room and signaled a willingness to at least try and de-escalate the situation.
Okay.
This wasn't just an economic issue. It could have had serious diplomatic consequences, too.
Yeah, for sure.
But as one of the Sky News articles pointed out, I don't think we're out of the woods yet.
Oh,
There was still a lot of uncertainty and a real risk that things could flare up again.
so even with the pause, it sounds like everyone was still on edge. Now, this is where it gets even more interesting. Sky News didn't just focus on North America. They also reported on Trump's interest in sourcing rare earth elements, which are crucial for a lot of modern technology, from Ukraine, and his threat to cut funding to South Africa.
Right.
How does that connect to our tariff story?
This is where we need to zoom out and look at the bigger picture.
Yeah.
These seemingly unrelated events actually point to a broader strategy at play.
Okay.
The interest in Ukrainian rare earth elements, the situation with South Africa, it all suggests a desire to diversify supply chains and potentially lessen reliance on certain countries, even if it means using tariffs as a lever.
So these actions with Ukraine and South Africa were all part of a larger plan, a way to reshape global trade in a way that benefits the U.S.
Exactly. It's like a giant game of chess, and each move has the potential to shift the entire board.
Wow.
And the implications extend far beyond just economics. We're talking about geopolitics, power dynamics, and the potential for unintended consequences.
Okay, let's focus on South Africa for a moment. Can you unpack that situation a bit more? Why did Trump threaten to cut off funding, and what did that move say about his approach to global trade?
According to Sky News analysis, the threatened funding cut stemmed from concerns about South Africa's land reform policies, specifically how they might impact U.S. investments in the country.
Gotcha.
It was a way of applying pressure, trying to force South Africa to change its policies to align with U.S. interests.
So basically saying, Do what we want or we'll hit you where it hurts your economy.
Yeah, it definitely highlights how intertwined trade politics and foreign policy can be.
It's pretty aggressive.
It is, and it raises a crucial question. What were the potential consequences of this kind of action? Could it actually backfire and harm U.S. interests in the long run?
Okay, so we've got this high-stakes game of international trade chess playing out. But how does this all actually affect the average person, someone listening to this right now?
That's a great question, and it's the reason why understanding these issues is so important. You might see the prices of imported goods from these countries go up.
Hmm.
That new phone or those avocados you love could become more expensive.
Oh, no.
And it's not just consumer goods either. Job markets could be affected, and even international travel might be impacted if relationships between countries really sour.
So something that seems like a distant political squabble can actually hit us right in the wallet.
It can. It's
Yeah.
all connected. We live in a globalized world whether we like it or not.
Right.
And these seemingly remote events can have real-world consequences for all of us.
Well, that's a perfect point to end part one on listeners. We'll be right back to dig even deeper into this fascinating and at times unsettling world of international tariffs.
It's a wild ride.
It is. Buckle up, everybody.
Yeah.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of international tariffs. Before the break, we were talking about how those tariffs that Trump slapped on Canada and Mexico weren't just an isolated incident. They were part of a larger pattern of protectionist moves.
Right.
We even touched on how those actions rippled out, affecting things like the price of avocados and the availability of rare earth elements for tech.
It's easy to get lost in the day-to-day headlines.
Yeah.
But what we're really seeing here is a reshaping of the global trade landscape.
Right. And as we discussed, tariffs are just one tool in a much larger toolbox
Exactly.
that countries use to exert influence and protect their interests.
It's all connected.
Okay, so let's dig into that a bit more. Sky News provided a lot of analysis along with their reporting on this situation. What were some of the key takeaways or insights they offered?
One thing that Sky News emphasized was the sheer unpredictability of the situation. Yeah. Even with all these experts weighing in, it was incredibly difficult to predict exactly how these trade tensions would play out.
But don't countries usually have, like, strategies and plans when it comes to trade?
Yeah.
It can't just be all chaos and guesswork.
Of course, they have strategies, but the global stage is a complex and ever-changing arena.
Right.
What Sky News highlighted was the potential for things to escalate rapidly, especially when you have strong personalities and conflicting national interests involved.
So it sounds like trying to navigate this world of tariffs and trade wars is a bit like walking through a minefield.
Yeah.
One wrong step and everything blows up.
That's a pretty accurate analogy.
Yikes.
And this is where having a deeper understanding of these dynamics can be so valuable.
Okay.
It's not just about knowing the definitions of tariffs or understanding the mechanics of trade deals.
Right.
It's about recognizing the broader forces at play, the motivations of different countries, and the potential consequences, both intended and unintended, of these actions.
So in a way, we're trying to become better informed spectators of this global trade game.
Exactly. And informed spectators are less likely to be caught off guard when things take an unexpected turn.
Right.
Remember, this isn't just a theoretical exercise. These decisions made on the global stage can have very real and tangible impacts on our everyday lives.
Okay, so we've got tariffs, retaliation, presidential phone calls, and this whole idea of reshaping global trade to benefit national interests. What about the other players in this game? What did Sky News have to say about the perspectives of Canada, Mexico, and South Africa?
Well, it's important to remember that each of these countries has its own unique set of priorities and concerns.
For sure.
While the U.S. might have viewed these tariffs as a way to protect its industries and jobs, they cause significant anxiety and economic hardship for Canadian and Mexican businesses.
It's easy to forget that there are real people and livelihoods on the other side of these trade disputes.
Absolutely.
What was the reaction like in those countries?
Well, there was a lot of uncertainty and frustration. Some businesses were forced to lay off workers or even shut down entirely because of the tariffs.
Why?
There was also a sense of betrayal, particularly in Canada, which had long considered itself a close ally of the U.S.
So it wasn't just about the economic impact, it also damaged relationships and trust between these countries.
Absolutely. Trade disputes can have long-lasting consequences, and it can take a lot of time and effort to rebuild those broken relationships.
This all paints a pretty bleak picture. Is there any hope for a more stable and predictable global trade system, or are we doomed to constant uncertainty and conflict?
That's the million-dollar question. Sky News did highlight some potential bright spots amidst all the gloom and doom.
Okay.
They pointed out that this period of disruption also presents opportunities for countries and businesses that are willing to be adaptable and innovative.
So it's not all bad news.
Right.
There's a chance that something good could come out of all this turmoil.
Exactly. For countries willing to be agile, there's the potential to forge new trade partnerships and carve out new niches in the global market. It's a time of uncertainty, yes, but also a time of potential transformation.
It sounds like we're living through a pivotal moment in history when it comes to global trade.
Hmm.
What we do now, the choices we make, will have a ripple effect for years to come.
Definitely. It underscores why it's so crucial for everyone, not just politicians and economists, to engage with these issues and understand the stakes involved.
Oh, that's a perfect segue to the final part of our deep dive, where we'll explore some of those potential implications for the future of globalization. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been unpacking this whole world of tariffs using that trade spat between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico as our case study. It's been fascinating and kind of alarming to see how much power these seemingly simple taxes have on the global stage.
Yeah, it's easy to dismiss trade disputes as something that only affects politicians and economists.
Right.
But as we've seen, the ripple effects can touch every aspect of our lives.
Exactly. And that brings us to our final question, the big one. Sky News didn't shy away from the big picture, and neither will we. If countries are this interconnected through trade, what does this whole situation tell us about the future of globalization?
That's a question that has been debated by experts for years, and there are no easy answers.
Right.
What we can say is that the era of unquestioned globalization, where goods and services flow freely across borders with minimal barriers, might be over.
So are we heading towards a world where everyone retreats back into their own economic corners, a
Yeah.
kind of reverse globalization?
It's certainly a possibility. We're seeing a rise in protectionist sentiment around the world,
Yeah.
with countries increasingly focused on safeguarding their own industries and jobs, even if it means putting up barriers to trade.
It feels like there's this tension between wanting the benefits of a globalized economy, like access to cheaper goods and diverse markets, while also wanting to protect domestic industries and workers from foreign competition. How do we balance those competing interests?
That's the challenge, isn't it? Finding that sweet spot where we can reap the rewards of globalization without leaving entire communities behind.
Right.
It requires careful planning, strategic thinking, and a willingness to adapt to a rapidly changing landscape.
It sounds like the future of globalization is far from certain. What are some things that our listeners should keep in mind as they navigate this complex world? What can they do to stay informed and make sense of it all?
Well, first and foremost, don't be afraid to ask questions and challenge assumptions. Don't just accept the headlines at face value.
Right.
Dig deeper, explore different perspectives, and think critically about the information you're consuming.
It's easy to get overwhelmed by all the noise, especially with something as complex as global trade.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's also incredibly important to stay engaged with these issues. They affect all of us, whether we realize it or not.
So our takeaway for listeners today is this. Tariffs are just the tip of the iceberg. We're in the midst of a massive shift in global trade, and the future is uncertain. But by staying informed, asking questions, and engaging with these issues, we can all play a part in shaping that future.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Knowledge is power, especially in a world as complex and interconnected as ours.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Huge thanks to our expert for guiding us through these choppy waters.
It was my pleasure. Always happy to be here.
And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those brains engaged. Until next time.